three sectors, and these three sectors equal what's called a UBA block 1. That's the utility block address mode. All it's saying is that when a hard drive is manufactured, they wanted to put code or they wanted to put a particular location on the hard drive, but the size may be different. Like I have a bad block area, and that bad block area may always be a maximum of 3 sectors. They just want to call it one thing, so they call it UBA block 1. So this is how manufacturers talk to their own hard drives. And why this matters is that there's some really high-end utilities that in typical cases are fairly expensive, and you may not ever see them, but if you want to find out what's wrong with your hard drive, you've got to talk to these blocks and find out which block is bad, if there's a scratch in a particular area. So you may have a UBA block 1 that's fine, but UBA block 2 may be messed up. So I'm going to kind of go through that content. The bad block list. Most people know that their hard drive has a bad block list. Most people don't realize that there are 2 bad block lists. The P list is the list that was done at manufacturing time. And typically, in some cases, it used to be printed on the outside label of the hard drive. They don't typically do that too often anymore because it's fairly large. But the P list is the primary list, and it's stored physically in the SA area. It is typically not changed. It is going to stay the same all the time. There are some tools that allow you to make changes to them, but typically they're not changed. The G list is the list that you know that physically makes changes as your drive is going. It's called the groan list. The groan list is every time your hard drive sees that there's a block, it's a bad block, I can't do anything with it, it'll add it to a table and it'll try to correct itself and try to remove itself so you never see that that's a bad block on your drive. So bad blocks really matter later on when we start to physically get into how we're doing a data recovery. And I'm going to show you where the bad blocks actually kind of play into your data recovery and where they are. All right, so most people know that if you have a hard drive that has multiple platters, your data is written in a cylinder. Everybody's heard that I have a cylinder. Well, what it really means is that your content is written on the platters sequentially down through all the platters. So if you have 3 platters, it writes on the top, then it writes the next bit on the bottom of that drive and down through, because all the heads move together at one time. So if you have a cylinder, and this is the other question I always get all the time, is like, why can't I just take this one platter and read it, and then go get the second platter and read it? And I've had people who, they've sent me like 2 platters in an envelope and try to do a recovery from it. And there's a definite problem there. The fact of the matter is that that one bit is directly above the next bit on the next platter. And if you have turned the 2 platters at all, the cylinder will never line up again. The hard part here is that the center, where the shaft is basically either one screw or a set of screws. And once you remove those screws, the platters spin independently. They basically are free-flowing platters. So once you've taken it off, there's no easy way to realign them. There is no way to realign them that I know of. So you've got to treat them together as a unit. If you have one single platter, which is some of the stuff I've talked about in my previous talks, and that you could actually do a recovery yourself by taking that platter out and moving it to another, you can only do that with a single platter. If you have multiple platters, there's a special tool that's involved. So previously, I've tried to keep a limit on what you would spend on tools or do something to like $50 if I'm talking to you guys trying to tell you how you could do your own recovery. But there is this one particular tool that's going to be, about $500 if you're going to do multiple platters. So if you're actually going to get into data recovery, it's a good tool to buy. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. The other important thing about dealing with a cylinder structure is that typically when you format your hard drive and you've used any normal operating system, Mac OS or Linux or any of the others, they make their structures for the partition on a cylinder boundary. The point is that you always know exactly where the beginning of your partition is. So if you have 3 platters, you don't have to scan the entire hard drive. You can do a mathematical calculation to figure out where the beginning of your partition should be. And if you have 5 partitions on your hard drive, you can figure out where that 5th partition is by size and so on and so on. The whole point is that if you scan a hard drive from beginning to end and there's bad blocks on it or you're going to have some physical damage, your hard drive may never survive that. You may try to scan, and that's what most file and data recovery software does. the majority of them scan from the beginning of your hard drive to the end and then give you a big table and try to produce what that table is so that you can do your data recovery. But if you know where your My Documents folder is on, say, a Windows data recovery, you can go straight to the My Documents folder. So you can find the beginning of your partition. You can go through, let's say, your FAT32 table, and then find the sector that begins your My Documents folder and go straight to it. There are a couple of tools that do that. Byteback is one of the only tools that I know of that will actually go and scan for the beginning of these partitions on a cylinder boundary without scanning your whole hard drive. There's a couple others like Media Tools Pro, and there's also some software from Runtime that will also do it. And you can actually go straight to a particular folder and try to do a recovery. Most of the time, if you're dealing with a hardware error where your hard drive is clicking, that's not going to be very helpful to you until you've repaired that problem. So then we get into the heads. Now, this is not Mr. Head. That's another kind of video, and it might be a good video, but it's not this video. So we're going to talk about the MR head. That's the magnetic resisto head. And basically, the magneto resisto head, it physically floats over the platter and reads the content from a bit. This is basically the head that you will know of before pretty much 2001. And 2001 is not too long ago, if most of you remember. Anybody have any idea what the largest hard drive you were using, say, by the end of by 2000? Anybody have an idea? It was in the neighborhood of like 10 gigs, and then there were some hard drives that were 16 gigs, and a few in the 20 gig range. Most of them were already using some new IBM technology, but I mean, if you figure from now, from then to now, we're looking at, we currently have a 1 terabyte drive available, and Hitachi just announced a 4 terabyte hard drive that's available. On laptops, they just announced a 320 gig laptop hard drive. So we're getting into some massive quantities. Now, some of that is due to perpendicular, but we're going to get into that in a second too. All right, so the MR head, basically what it would do, the head of the 90s, which is probably some of the most reliable hard drives that were out there, it was a sensitive hard drive's head, but it was not a real sensitive hard drive head like we have now. And it basically used a resistance method to tell when the bit passed under it. So the difference between that and today's head is that it actually knew at that particular moment by registering when the bit passed under it by doing a high and low value, and knows that you now have a bit that passed under it. Today's head, which is the giant head, again, a different movie, it is much more complex than the older head, and now we have some heads that they're saying are 7-layer heads. So some of the Fujitsu heads that they've been building now have 7 layers. The thing with this particular head is that the green and the blue that are there are basically 2 magnets, and they are in opposite patterns. And what was discovered by, and these guys just got some Nobel Peace Prize award or something just like a month ago for developing and figuring out in the 80s what we now use for the head of our hard drive. Anybody see that in the news? Yeah. So basically the whole point is that you take 2 magnets that are in opposite directions, put a soft piece of material between them, and they will align themselves in parallel. So physically it will look exactly like they're pointing in the same direction until another bit passes under it. Now, the difference is that between the old head and the new head is it knew that bit passed under it then. This head basically does it based upon the bit already passed by, and now it's passed me, and once it passes me, it causes the electrons to bounce around inside the head and determine that it has already passed and it's already gone. So the spot has already passed before it even knew that that particular bit was there. I think that's pretty important, and it actually affects some of our data recoveries from a standpoint